Hello everyone, and welcome back to another hopefully highly anticipated video from the Women's World Championship match. I'm WGM Sabina Foisor, and I'm very excited to take you through some of my favorite moments that happened in the match so far. I have made a preview video for the tournament, and if you haven't watched it, we're gonna link it underneath this video so that you can catch up with my predictions and learn more about the two players. Just to give a quick recap, the two competitors are number 2 player in the world and the current Women's World Champion, Grandmaster Wenjun, who's from Shanghai, and the 3rd player in the world, Grandmaster Tan Zhongyi, who's from Chongqing. That's the reason why the match actually takes place in both cities. The first 6 games were played in Shanghai, and the next 6 are going to be played in Chongqing. The match so far had 7 rounds, and 5 of those were decided. So stay close to this video, and let's get into the games and have hopefully some learnable moments. If you are enjoying this video, don't forget to give us a thumbs up and follow US Chess on social media so that you can stay notified for the various information, news to be posted, maybe videos like these, podcasts, and many others. So in the first game of the match, Wenjun surprised everyone as she started with the move e4. This is certainly not the first time she has ever played e4 in a World Championship match, or in general, as a matter of fact, but most people know her for her positional style and playing mostly d4, c4, knight f3, pawn structures, typically in Catalan style or Queen's Gambit. But e4, certainly with her team, she probably has prepared things that are still in the spirit of the way she typically plays, more positionally. And strategic, of course, as well. But let's not forget, once you get to be, at their level, in order to maintain that level, you have to know a bit of both styles, and she certainly does. And Tan Zhongyi responded with c5. The Sicilian has been one of their main, in fact, the only opening that the two players have played so far in this match. So Ju continued knight f3, e6, d4, takes, knight f6, and here was probably a surprise to Tan as Ju played the move bishop d3. Typically you see ideas with c4 and knight c3 following this move, but most of the time people actually play, instead of d3, knight to c3 in this position. So since Ju played this move relatively fast, she clearly was ready against her opponent's Sicilian. Let's not forget that Tan plays other openings as well, and different Sicilians too. In this particular case, knight c6 was played, and immediately Ju traded, pawn takes, and she played the move bishop f4. To me, I think there were a few additional ideas, and it would have been a bit more keeping more options open by castling, because this bishop could also be developed through b3, bishop b2. And although black might have this idea to go d5 and control the center, that's not going to stop the bishop from having, strong activity on the diagonal. But after bishop f4, d5, knight to d2. Obviously, if you're going to put the knight in c3, you're blocking the c pawn from going to c4 later on. So the knight was played in d2, and now g6. So when I first saw that this move was played in the game, I remembered how I often explain my students to be mindful about pushing both the e pawn and the g pawn, because the bishop in f8 cannot control both diagonals, and it's going to be difficult to control all of the dark squares. But this proved to be a good idea and the correct move in the position for black, as she maintains this bishop in d3 closed away from black's king should castle happen later on. And yeah, the position is perfectly fine. There's not so much to be worried about. And something that I noticed from this match as well is the fact that both players seem to have prepared some kind of pawn structures. In a way, for Tan, it was this kind of French pawn structure where she gets the opportunity to get the B pawn coming closer towards the center and support the pawn to go forward, while Wenjun had in a lot of the games, both with white and black pieces, this idea of attacking that center and leaving black with an isolated pawn. The game continued bishop g5, h6, pushing the bishop away so that now we can develop, and obviously because of the pin, black cannot fianchetto the bishop and has to instead go bishop e7, but that's perfectly fine because despite these pawn pushes that got weakened, the bishop still remains closed, and black will have sufficient defense towards the king. The game continued with a5 to develop the bishop in a6, queen e2, castle, rook d1, and now black needs to try to trade some pieces because these pawns are not going to march themselves forward. But if you trade pieces a little bit to go towards an endgame, you might be able to do so. Here, Zhu had the opportunity to maintain the tension in the position by playing bishop g3, but she said post-game interview that she felt she wasn't quite sure how the position would go after, so she decided to go for this move. Oftentimes, for those of you who have been following matches, you know, typically players are not showing as much in the first game. They're playing more quietly. Well, that wasn't the case in the match between Ding and Gukesh, for sure. But typically matches do have the first game that ends in a draw as the players get in shape. They try to get the feeling of what the other has prepared. Psychology is also very important. So lots of things to consider. There's usually more, careful with taking super strong decisions. So after c4, here knight e5 was played, trying to take the bishop, and as the players traded a lot of pieces, this was an important move that Zhu found, queen to e3, because it attacks the pawn in h6, pins the pawn in e6, and now threatens to take this pawn. And there is only one move that, would defend everything for black, and Tan has found it. You can try to pause the video and see if you can come up with that move. Queen g5 was that move. As the queens are forcingly getting traded, it may feel that white has a bit of advantage now because look at black's pawn structure. They got two isolated pawns and these double pawns, but the plus is the fact that they have the bishop versus the knight, and the knight is not quite ready to come up with a good square just yet, or just to reach it, better said. d4 might be a good one, maybe e5, but black made sure, as the next moves were played, to keep that knight from getting onto a better square. So she first Zhu played rook e1, then Tan played rook b8, attacking the pawn in b3. In b2, b3 was played, and now I love this move g4, a very nice restrictive move to keep the knight from getting to d4. Now the knight does have a new path to be brought to e3, but as the game continued, black was able to trade her weaknesses one by one, leading soon to a game that petered out to a draw. This was the continuation. Rook here, rook takes d5, and bishop e6. After the capture of the pawn in a2, it surely does look like white was able to get a bit of advantage as she was able to win a pawn, but that pawn is to be lost quite soon as black maintains active pieces. These two pieces are behind, have to cover the back rank, and black is going to soon capture a5. The players have played a few more moves as everything got traded off, and with pawns on the same side of the board, it only took a couple more moves for them to agree to a draw, and that happened over here. So the first game didn't really show as much fighting spirit maybe, but as I mentioned, it was important from a positional standpoint to kind of feel each other, what they had prepared, and maybe get started to the next part of the match. Now game 2 had a different result than what it had in 2018, where it was Wenjun that won that game. In this particular one, it was Tan Zhongyi, and it was still a rook endgame. This was a tweet that I saw quite a few times by a lot of people comparing their two matches. That, you know, in that game there was a rook endgame that you can also see, by the way, in my preview video, and here it was a rook endgame as well. And the two players played in English, and eventually, you know, the pieces got traded off, and it got into this position. It was a pretty balanced game so far, and it was at this moment that I think Wenjun misjudged her position, and she might have felt that she can play on for a win. Obviously, it is important, I think, in a match to try to take the first win. It gives a boost of confidence, I think, but both players are, of course, super professional, and certainly have learned so far how to deal with wins and losses. So it's not going to be the end of the world if you lose one game, but somehow here Ju misjudged the position. She probably felt that because she has this further away passed pawn compared to this one, she's the one who can play on for a win. And instead of returning with the rook to b3 to keep the pawn well protected, and you know, if the king would approach the rook, she could always go back to f3, give up the b pawn for this one. Instead, she played the move rook f5, and this was a mistake, because as I'm flipping the board now to look from white's perspective, we can clearly see that white is controlling the 7th rank, which stops black's king from advancing further and get in front of the d pawn. As opposed to that, right, now white's king is free to move forward and attack black's rook. The rook is always better placed behind the pawn. That's the best location for it. I think the second one is in front of it because you're still supporting its push forward to promotion. To the side, it's a tricky one. It could be in between those two, or it could be the last one, the worst one. The reason I say that, in some situations it could be good to keep your rook to the side because, you know, you have the ability to attack something, or it's not going to be chased away easily, and then you would be able to bring the king in front of the pawn to support it while the rook doesn't need to free itself. But in this particular situation, the rook is going to be stuck there while black's king cannot be brought to support the pawn. So now after king e3 h5, white played the move f4, and now we reach the move 40 with white. So black still had to make one move to reach move 40, and in this particular position, Wenjun made a huge blunder. I'm going to flip the board once again and give you a moment to think how black could try to create some drawing resources in order to try to save the game. The biggest issue, the fact that the king is cut off, we're not able to bring it to get in front of the pawn, and now there's a huge threat, king e4, and we're losing the pawn. So what do we do? On move 40, despite having 2 minutes and a half, Ju played this move almost instantaneously, and she failed to be able to defend the position. It's not going to be easy, but the correct move here would have been b4. So we are giving up the pawn, but we admit we've made a mistake. We placed our rook badly. It's about to be trapped and pushed away. We need to get it active as soon as possible. This was the move that she should have played. And now after rook takes b4, we're not cut off anymore, so we can bring the king to a better location. After check, we can go king f6. This is the move that I like quite a bit. Why we keep the king here and we don't get in front of the pawn? To free up the rook, because that was our main idea. We need this rook to go active, start attacking the pawn in h2, maybe go from behind and give checks to stop white from advancing that pawn further. But somehow, you know, the rules are tricky. We sometimes still feel that we can play for a win, but unfortunately after king e8, there's no more chance to do that, and the game switched directions. Now it is white definitely who is on the way to win, and it's for real. It actually happens. There's nothing that black can do. King e4 attacking the rook. And as this pawn was captured, the difference between this position and the other one is that now that pawn in h5 is protected. So black doesn't have the time to bring the king, instead has to protect that pawn, and now d5. With this pawn having pushed already a bit, if you're attempting king e7 or king d7, white can play king e5, followed by rook b7, d6, and with that pawn marching, eventually white is going to convert the game. After d5, rook a6, the game continued in a beautiful fashion by Tan. She brought her king to support the d pawn, gave up the h pawn, but you know, this pawn is already passed, and without black's king being able to actually stay in front of it, she was able to bring her own and convert this endgame. This is another important moment that I wanted to stop at in this particular game. Here, after the move h3, black seems to have been able to create a counterplay, as we have equal material, and this pawn has some chances to be promoted with the rook moving, or having some opportunity to give a check and then, you know, promote. So here, the question for you is, where do you move the king? Do you go king c6 to threaten back rank mate, or do you play king d6? Take a moment, pause the video, and think of the best move. King c6 would have been the blunder. It looks nice to threaten the mate, but after this check and h2, now I wanted to disprove my rule so that you understand why you always have to try to understand the position. Remember when I told you that the rook to the side is not so great? Well, in this case, it would have been. Hopefully I'm not confusing you more, and it actually is a way to get you to learn this. The fact that the rook is to the side now, it protects the pawn, which has advanced quite a lot, much more than all of white's pawns, and the rook maintains the ability to give a lot of checks or attack one of white's pawns. So now, when white goes to try to capture the pawn in f6, we're playing the move king d8, approaching with the king. We don't want to stay too far away. In case they try to push us back and take the pawn, we are getting in front of it. And now if that pawn gets captured, the rook will be able to give checks, and white will never have the ability to actually win. I've put this line over here just as an idea to make sure my explanation is clear enough. Now we can keep the rook behind the pawn to attack it. If you check us, we go king d7. And if you try to promote, we check, you hide, we bring the king. And that pawn will be lost. So there's no way for white to actually come up with a win. Something else that we could have seen in this position, instead of this check, after king c7, we could attempt this check, and black can play king c6, and you can say, oh my goodness, Sabina, did you just blunder check rook? Yes, I did, but oh no, my rook, is that for real? No, it's not. We can't actually take it because black does promote. So, you know, maybe you'll still make a draw here because you got the pawn really close to promotion, but you're not going to win this position, I promise. So white would have to go back, and then we can always bring the king back, and this would be a draw. Thankfully, Tan has spent quite a bit of time here to make sure she calculated everything to convert the game, and she played the move king d6, and after the next few moves, she simply pushed her pawn to promotion, and the h-pawn unfortunately cannot be supported further, because now what we need to do with white is just make sure we activate this rook so that we can cover an exit for our king, and Tan did it in a beautiful fashion. Simply rook h3, checking the king, and now rook to e2. With the rook controlling the e-file and maintaining the pressure on this pawn, the king can escape easily, similar to a Lucena, but we didn't even need to do the rook lift or stairway. And now after king e7, Wenjun lost. So this was the first decided game of the match. After this game, the players had a day off, and it could have been that it was much better motivational kind of day for Ju, as she had the day to refocus, maybe work more on her calculation, decision making, and bring in a nice game in the future round. Let's go on to game 3. Now, this game was pretty balanced between the two players. It was still a Sicilian, and the players reached this position. Now, Ju was able to at least get something from this game as she has an extra pawn, but there is a small problem. We got opposite color bishops, and you know what they say, opposite color bishops, you know, there's a lot of chances for a draw. But you don't give up your chances when you get them. I mean, there are some ways for white to get activated, and with black's king having to stay to stop the pawn, and with the bishop having to stay to protect here, white has some ways to infiltrate with the king and eventually put pressure in f7 and maybe trade off towards an endgame where she can win. So black has to be super cautious on how to defend this, and of course staying home and having the engine close by to be able to analyze things. It's easy for me to say that in this position Tan made a blunder, but when you're playing such positions, you have to be mindful for the real threats that the opponents have in the position and try to stop them. This was something that we came up with, me and the computer that is, to try to keep the rook to pin the bishop, because if that bishop is pinned, then when the rooks get traded, the bishop endgame should be a draw. There's no way for white to actually win anything. But there's still some ideas for white to try to improve, but by giving this check, right? But even such moves eventually should lead to black being able to cover the c-pawn from advancing, and I think there should be some chances for a draw. But in the game, Tan ended up playing this move, bishop c6. By playing this, she took her bishop away from the protection of f7, and white was able to infiltrate now. Her idea was to play rook a4 and attempt the trades of the rooks, but maybe she missed with the calculation that now after check king d7, white is able to get the king advanced, and it was not the king that had to protect f7, because the king is much easier chased away from there. The bishop should have been the one covering while the king staying in front of the c-pawn. Because of this, now bishop f4, and the ideas are simple. All we have to do is bring the rook to d6, push the king back, bring the king to g7, and eventually we're going to push the king from protecting the pawn, while this bishop is not going to find it easy to actually switch over and protect f7. So the game continued as follows: rook b8, rook d8. Tan was able to get the bishop back to e6, but we got a problem. The king has been cut off, so now the king doesn't have the ability to get in front of the c-pawn, and rook d6 was a dominant move that I really liked, because now the king is cut off both horizontally and vertically. This is the kind of cut off you want to try to avoid. And now the king infiltrated. A couple more waiting moves, because you're trying to get the additional time and make sure you know how to proceed further. And f3. This move sets up a beautiful mating net. Now the king doesn't have much squares to go to. King rook c4, c6. And we're getting the king active. Now, in this position, g5 was played. And takes, and now actually Ju had this cute idea of trying to actually checkmate her opponent. Instead, she went for bishop b6, and eventually she did win this endgame with the c-pawn, but check this cute idea out. Bishop f6, king f5, and now pause the video and try to find a way to mate this king. It's not too hard, I think. The correct move, rook to d4, threatening a mate. You can say, but I go rook c4. Well, sorry, I lied. It was not just rook f4 that was the threat. g4 was the threat as well. And here we got the checkmate. So, you know, if you don't do that and you simply move the bishop somewhere, I put it in a2 so that the king can run away. Prophylaxis, because we love those. Those are my favorite my favorite things to do when you restrict the opponent's king. Now we're threatening rook e5 checkmate, and if you're gonna go rook c5 to cover that, we can play the move c7. The threat is c8 queen, and when you capture it, you're gonna get mated. You can attempt bishop e6 to stop the pawn, but then we got this nice mate. So that was a way that Zhu could have won. The game was played in a different fashion, but it was still a beautiful win by her. With this game, she equalized the score, so it was 1.5 to 1.5 after 3 games. Let's move on to game 4, which actually was another game that I think Tan was dominating in a way. She had a slightly better position and she had the white pieces. I feel that in almost every game she somewhat outplayed her opponent, at least was better prepared in the opening. But Zhu has had this very great understanding of positions and was able to somehow, choose positions where her opponent was more prompt to making mistakes. This was a cute, learnable moment with a tactic from this game. This is the only moment that I want to show from this one. So in this position, if we're evaluating it, maybe it looks similar to something we've seen in the past, right? Where white has the further away passed pawn, black has an isolated pawn and passed more in the center. But which one is weaker? Well, probably it's black's pawn in d5 that is weaker. So if we can find a way to get rid of it, that would be it. And this was a moment where black could have actually played d4. It was a nice moment that I actually saw being described in the conference by Women's International Master Charlize Van Zyl, who, by the way, is doing an amazing job with bringing interesting moments to the fans too. So she's the press officer of FIDE. You can definitely check out some of her videos as well. So here d4 could have been played, and the idea is, of course, you cannot capture because queen takes c7. Ouch, that pawn is lost. If you capture with the rook, which seems like the move to mate, then we got this fork. You're gonna take, we take. We don't take, we give a check first. You go king g2. Now we take because we take with the check. And when you recapture, we got this move queen e4, after which black has some chances to win. Now, obviously, this line is not forced after d4. White does not need to make such a blunder, but it would have been a nice idea to try to push that pawn and equalize the game, because with the bishop pair, white is definitely the one with more chances. That was not played, and in the end, the game still ended in a draw, and it was quite interesting to see. This game ended with king versus king, and when the players were asked at the press conference why did they play that much, they said that they're doing it for the fans. Every single game is played for the fans, making sure they bring the best of themselves, and fans can enjoy. Now the next game, personally, I think is one of my favorites. It's been a really dominating game by Zhu, and I'm gonna go through the entire game with you guys and discuss my favorite moments. So it was once again a Sicilian, but this time Tan did not play the move knight f6. Instead, she chose to play the Kan variation, bishop d3 once again. As I mentioned, Zhu seems to have enjoyed those setups with the bishop in d3 to follow through with c4. And here, after knight b3, the bishop went back, castle, knight d7, c4. And in this position, I was surprised by Tan's decision of not castling. Instead, she went for the move knight d5. Now, this is an interesting choice. Definitely has been tried once by another Chinese international master, but it's not necessarily something that you want to do in the opening. You want to focus on your development. You want to make sure you get your pieces out, and this was somewhat of surprise, but maybe not so much. And after a little bit of thought, Zhu came up with a cool idea. c5, playing exactly against the Kan bishop. I don't know if I can call it that, but I will. Anyways, the Kan bishop, right? c5, blocking the bishop and somewhat stopping black from pushing one of those pawns, because once you do, we're going to trade. And, what kind of pawn structure are we having next? This probably was something that surprised Tan, as she continued knight g6 and now bishop e2, not allowing her opponent to capture the bishop anymore. And here, I'm going to flip the board and give you a moment to think about what is black's plan in the position, and if you were black, how would you continue yourselves? I hope you made the right decision. Your bishop is struggling. You cannot afford to let that bishop closed by this pawn. I know the pawn could look like a weakness that you will attack later, but trust me, it's easy for white to get to protect it, and it's really keeping your bishop out of play. So b6 is very important. This is a move that I personally was surprised to see Tan not play. In my opinion, in this game, she focused very much on the plan that she had, probably against another move that white was going to play. She thought she could do the same thing, but in this case, she ended up giving herself a much worse position as she played the move b5. Wenjun continued with f4, because what is this knight doing here now that your bishop is locked, right? By the way, after b6 the trade would happen, this move wouldn't be possible. So another reason why black had to play b6. Sorry, knight c4 was played, a4, b4, and now white captured, pawn takes c3. This is another very important moment, and many of you might struggle with this. I know I have in the past. So in positions where a capture was made, you feel that you need to respond automatically with a recapture. But get yourself used to making sure you're double checking everything, because you never know when you might miss a cute in-between move. In this case, why capturing this pawn with a pawn when we are weakening our pawn structure, when we can have the chance to let them take here, to recapture with a bishop, and have a great bishop on the diagonal, while our pawn in c5 is still a dominating force, restricting black from pushing the d pawn. A very strong move here for white in this position, which I only put interesting, but I think it's actually a good move, is the move queen to d4, putting pressure in g7, putting pressure in c3. If you're going to play the move f6 to defend, bam, I'm taking you the queen. I have a much better pawn structure. Why wouldn't I want to have this pawn structure instead of the other, right? Bishop e3 and everything just flows, I think. In case after queen d4 capture, bishop takes, once again, g7 is hanging. So when you play the move f6, look at this beautiful idea. f5, breaking through the position, weakening black's king, and it's definitely a dominant position with a huge advantage for white. Zhu actually missed this opportunity twice. In this position, she had again the opportunity to go queen d4. Instead, she let go of her advantage by playing the move queen to e2. And after castle, bishop d3, it seemed that she was getting ready to come up with some kind of attacking ideas towards black's king. And it is in this moment that Tan made a huge mistake. It is very important to assess the position every time the pawn structure changes. In this case, with these weak pawns, with this bad bishop, black cannot afford to not to make the right kind of breakthrough. And in my opinion, Tan made a huge mistake here. She played the move f5. I want you to take a moment and try to see if you can come up with another pawn break that would help her equalize in this position. In my opinion, queen c7 had to be played. The idea is we're putting pressure on c5, and when you go bishop e3, this is the kind of block that I want to do, so that these bishops really don't look towards black's king, and these bishops will get into play very soon. If you play the move f5, we're going to go knight f4. Feel free to take it if you want, but after the pawn recaptures, this pawn is weak, the bishop is closed, we can put pressure, we can go rook c8, we have the bishop pair, and the game is back wide open. And the result basically is wide open. Both players will have the chances here. After f5, Zhu took the advantage of the position by capturing. She developed her bishop, protected c5, and after queen c7, she simply captured the pawn in a6. That was not a trap. It was possible to capture. In case of a recapture, queen takes, bishop takes e5, we do have this check bishop. This is the reason why you have seen me putting a question mark to the move queen c7. King h8 would have been a nice prophylactic idea. At least in that line at the end, there's no queen c4, so at least if white captures, we're trading off a pawn. But the position is still very unpleasant for black because this bishop remained closed, and there are quite a few more weaknesses. Much easier for white to attack than it is for black to attack white's weaknesses. The game continued very well in Wenjun's fashion. She's dominating, she has the extra material, and Tan came up with just this only idea to make this sacrifice in f4 in order to try to complicate matters or make it, you know, get a bit of activity, because she's obviously quite passive. But after rook takes f4, bishop takes f4, Zhu missed an opportunity to finish the game even faster. Pause the video and see if you can find it. Obviously, it was not going to be rook takes f4, which was played in the game. Instead, this cute move, in between move once again, c6. And the idea is if you capture with the rook, we're going to play this move queen to f7. And we freed up the queen from the attack. We're attacking the rook, g7, and the bishop. So white is close to win here. If you capture with the queen, we can trade queens, and this endgame is much easier to win for white than it was with the queens on the board. And of course, after d takes c6, knight c5 wins material. The game eventually ended in Zhu's favor, but that was the only moment that I wanted to focus on. This game certainly was going to be a tough game for Tan, because now, after starting the match with a win and leading it, now she was led by Zhu by 1 point, and she felt probably the need to improve the position. Here, after the move bishop f5, I felt that Tan had to make the objective decision of maintaining equality. And since this is the worst placed piece, white had to play the move knight c4. Instead, she neglected to bring that knight into the game for quite some time, as she went for trading off quite a bit of pieces. But the problem is, when you don't improve your pieces that are placed worse, you're going to have a harder time to actually get them onto better squares, and you're going to allow your opponent to improve quite a bit. After knight e4, rook d1, rook d8, she finally brought it into the game, but this wasn't the moment anymore, because check this out. b5 came in with tempo, f5 came in, not really with tempo, but it protects the knight and we're threatening bishop f6. g5 came in, and now suddenly black can say that they have a super dominant position. The majority is being pushed there, it's being pushed on this side too. And after knight e1, Zhu missed a little bit the chance to gain even more advantage by playing g4 or c4. Instead, she traded off the bishops and gave Tan one final chance for equality as more pieces got traded off the board. The knight endgame, we gotta evaluate it. Always remember to evaluate knight endgames. Typically, the resulting knight endgames are the same as king and pawn, but you always have to double check. So in this case, we do not really want to trade queens, because I think the play for black is much easier with the pawn structure being the way it is. Black will create a further away past pawn, and in this case, it will matter. So Tan made the right decision of keeping queens on the board and activating it on the queen side as she brought it to a8, but she failed to realize the side of the board she had to play in. This is a very important moment where I hope you guys take a moment to think about the breakthrough that you will do. And remember to be mindful about black's ideas as well. You have two choices here, h4 or a4. Which one do you choose? I believe you're going to be tempted to go h4, because that's the side of the board where you have the majority. You see that g4 is going to be unpleasant, and you're going to feel that you have to play h4. However, it is more important to actually trade off the pawns on the queen side to create some weaknesses and avoid allowing black to trade your queens. This was the move that Tan had to play. Since she missed this opportunity and played h4, the queens got traded, And, you know, here we can play h3, not to allow g4. And, you know, you can see more of my analysis in the Lichess link to follow through with everything that happened. In the game after h4, Zhu continued with g4, pushed the knight away. And now you have no choice whether you move the knight or give the check first. The queens would be traded in d5 or d7, and this endgame is dominant for black, as black's king is much more active. The knight will be much more active as well. This knight does not have a good square, and I think it goes back to the moment that she did not really activate it when she had to. So eventually Zhu won. After that game, the players had 2 days rest, and they move over to the other location of the match, Chongqing. Now, being led 4-2 is definitely not a fun way to restart the second part of the match, but from a psychological point of view, you have to find a way to forget about it and start a new match. That's my personal opinion. This is what I've heard from other players. I could be wrong, but feel free to let me know in the comments if you think I am. So today's game, when I'm at the time of this recording, actually went in Wenjun's favor as well. So the match is now 5-2. Very difficult to come back from, but we'll have to see if Tan will be able to put herself together and forget about the past and just really start a new tournament. She still can come back into this match, but, and as she has the white pieces tomorrow, but will she be able to do that? It remains to be seen. In this situation, in this position, Wenjun played the move Queen h5, which I think, you know, was a novelty, but not really the right approach. As the game will show, g3 was necessary. Why change something that worked well? That is how I'm going to approach that position. And she tried to protect the h2 pawn with the queen, but this allowed black to get a bit of activity. So Tan has had her chances. She definitely has had a lot of chances, very good positions, but somehow I think the pressure of the match or something else was not going into was not going well for her. Here in this game, as you can see, she won that pawn in h2. And okay, the game is not decisive. A pawn in h2 is not as powerful or as valuable, maybe in a way, as one in the center, as I've heard many grandmasters discuss that, but it was still good. But she has to be careful because there's a small problem. She also has the weakness in c6, and she has that bishop that has to find a square to go to. And it is here that she made the wrong decision. Obviously, with knight c5, white is forking both the rook and the bishop, and you have to make a decision as to which piece you will move. It seems more natural to go rook b6, but there's a better move here for black. That better move would have been bishop e2. So with this move, basically, if you take the rook, we take it, and with maintaining the bishop close by, we actually will have some ideas for the queen to get activated to attack white's king. For example, if white captures queen takes and queen takes b4, it would be a huge blunder, because after queen h4 check, king g1, black can simply play the move bishop d6, threatening mate. And you cannot go e5. No. That's not happening. You gotta go g3. But when you play g3, guess what? I'm just gonna take it, and the mate is coming. So obviously, you know, she could have put her opponent in some difficulty to find this move king g1 and try to hold on, but she maintains the pressure, she maintains the bishop pair, and this is the way she has to continue. Unfortunately for her, the way she played this game, it just seemed that she was always trying to find ways or play some kind of hope chess, hoping that her opponent will make a mistake, and not she's lost a bit the objectivity. At some point during the game, she does do that. This was another moment where she placed her bishop on a really bad square there in c8, and the knight is the one which is dominating the bishop now. After e5, the queens got traded, and maybe she thought she's going to go for a draw, but unfortunately for her, in this position after king takes f4, she played the move bishop b7. a move that should not have been played. It's very important for black to free up the bishop. So you are up a pawn here, just give it up. You don't need it. You don't need it. Oh, sorry, not like that. Not yet. First king g7. First king g7. Let the opponent capture it so that you can have the opportunity to go bishop b7 with tempo. And from here on, you know, she could have drawn the game. Losing game after game must be devastating, and I certainly hope she's gonna find her way to come back somehow, because it is tough. This is the way the game continued, and as you can see, black never really had a chance. The bishop in a8 is totally dead, and now white went on to capture every single one of black's pawns. Now we're also threatening rook d7 and the bishop, and the game ended in Wenjun's favor. This was certainly a much longer video than I anticipated, but I certainly hope you had a lot of learnable moments and you have enjoyed it as much as I have enjoyed watching the match. Stay close to the Chess Life Online. Check out the website, and stay tuned with my future annotations. We're also leaving it once again in the description below. And don't forget to follow US Chess and let us know how I did in this video so that I can make sure to improve for future ones. Bye everyone.